excited because this is a really an opportunity to learn more about what's happening in Washington, where there is a cap and invest program, as it is called, but there's discussion about its potential linkage with Quebec and California. And so Stephanie will be able to provide us with a overview of what's going on with that program in Washington, and also discuss the linkage rationale. I'll just wait another minute or two as people come in, but as a background on these webinars, we know that the province of Ontario was linked with California and Quebec for a few months in 2018. And so there's sort of some experience with linkage. Of course, California, Quebec linked their programs in 2013, 2014, I believe, actually. And there's some, what will happen if Washington were to join. That's something that we'll find out about. Before I hand over the PowerPoint, the presentation to Stephanie, just to mention that we will have probably 2 webinars coming up in the near future. On June 6th, we will have a webinar on the most recent California-Quebec auction results. And just the Tuesday before that, we will also have a webinar on renewable natural gas. So thank you very much. Stephanie, I will turn over the virtual platform to you. So if you're able to share your screen, it
says you have to stop sharing before I can start sharing.
Yes, sorry. Stop sharing. Okay, sorry.
Okay, are you able to see my screen?
Yep, looks very good. Thank you.
Great. So for my presentation today, first I'll give a bit of an overview of Washington's Cap and Invest program, and then I'll talk a bit about the linkage process and timeline. The Cap and Invest program in Washington sets a limit or cap on carbon emissions in the state, and it requires businesses to obtain allowances equal to their covered greenhouse gas emissions. These allowances can be obtained through quarterly auctions hosted by Washington Department of Ecology, or they can be bought and sold on the secondary market. The cap will be reduced over time to ensure that Washington's large emitters contribute to achieving the state's emissions reduction commitments, which means that we'll be issuing fewer allowances each year. And so this graph shows how the cap on covered emissions declines over the life of the program to reach the emissions reductions targets of 45% below 1990 levels by 2030, 70% below 1990 levels by 2040, and 9% below 1990 levels, and net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So over time, as the allowance supply goes down, we expect that the cost of allowances will go up, which provides a financial incentive for businesses to reduce their emissions. The Washington program is broken up into 7 4-year compliance periods. And to comply with the program, participating emitters must submit compliance instruments equal to their covered emissions by the end of the compliance period. There are 2 types of compliance instruments, each equal to 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. There are the allowances I mentioned that are issued by Ecology, and this is the primary way to comply with the program. And there are also offset credits, and those are gained by investing in projects that help reduce carbon in the atmosphere, things like reforestation, for example. And in Washington, there are limits to how much offset credits can be used for compliance. So it's a pretty small portion, less than 8%, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. In Washington, the Cap and Invest program is the broadest emissions reduction program that we have. It covers 75% of statewide emissions, and it covers facilities that emit over 25,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, including on-road transportation fuels like gas and diesel, industry, and electricity consumed in Washington, and natural gas. In the later compliance periods, we'll add waste to energy facilities and railroads. The legislature, when they passed the Climate Commitment Act, determined that 3 types of businesses should get free allowances. And those are industries that are determined to be emissions intensive and trade exposed. Also natural gas utilities and electric utilities. And the amount of free allowances that those industries get varies based on the type of business and goes down over the life of the program. The legislature also determined that certain types of emitters should be exempt, and that's entities that emit less than 25,000 metric tons of CO2, also agricultural operations, and aviation fuels, and most marine fuels. So as I mentioned, emitters can use offset credits for a small part of their compliance obligation. So an offset credit is equivalent to 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, and they're generated by projects that reduce, remove, or avoid greenhouse gas emissions, but also provide benefits to Washington. So they're projects that don't directly reduce emissions from the emitter, but somewhere else, like projects to plant trees or capture methane from livestock. And there are limits in the amount of offset credits an emitter can use, and that goes down over time. So in the first compliance period, one entity that's participating in the program can use offset credits for 5% of their compliance obligation, but then they can increase that by an additional 3% if they also get credits from projects on tribal land. So overall, a limit on 8% for the first compliance period. So for example, if a company has 100,000 tons of emissions, they could use offset credits to cover 8,000 tons if some of those come from tribal projects. For later compliance periods, they can use offset credits to cover 4% of their compliance obligation, with an additional 2% from projects on tribal lands. So for later compliance periods, the overall limit is 6%. In Washington, offset credits are what we call under the cap, meaning that ecology will reduce the cap by the amount of offset credits used in the previous compliance period. So if that company uses 8,000 offset credits for compliance, ecology will then adjust the allowance budget in the future to remove 8,000 allowances from the market. The overall limit on the use of offset credits for compliance and having offset under the cap are really meant to ensure that the use of offsets doesn't prevent Washington from achieving its greenhouse gas emissions limits. So far, Washington has adopted 4 offset protocols from the California program, and those are forestry, urban forestry, livestock projects, and ozone removal projects. And we're currently in the rulemaking process for our offsets program to consider adding and updating protocols to increase the potential variety of offset projects that can be developed within the Cap and Invest program. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the invest part of the Cap and Invest program. So to date, the program has raised 1.96 billion US dollars. And the Climate Commitment Act, which is the law that established the program, it established 3 primary accounts to house Cap and Invest auction proceeds until they're appropriated by the legislature. So funds in each of these accounts are earmarked for specific types of climate, environmental justice, and ecological projects. The carbon emissions reduction account funds projects that reduce transportation sector emissions, so such as public transit and pedestrian and bike infrastructure. The climate investment account funds the administration of the Cap and Invest program and also projects that increase climate resiliency in communities and ecosystems. So it can fund a really broad set of projects that do things like improve energy efficiency or protect and restore fish and wildlife habitat. And then funds in the air quality and health disparities improvement account must be used for projects that address issues of environmental justice and health inequity in the state, such as additional air quality monitoring and projects to reduce health disparities. The majority of funding so far has gone towards transportation and buildings, which are the two largest sources of pollution in Washington. The CCA requires that a minimum of 35%, with the goal of 40% of auction revenue, be used for projects that provide a direct benefit to vulnerable populations within overburdened communities. In addition, 10% of auction funds must be used for projects with tribal support. While the legislature is responsible for selecting which projects are funded with the auction proceeds, the law directs the state's Environmental Justice Council to provide recommendations on which projects should receive funding. The Department of Ecology is required to provide the legislature with an annual report detailing how auction funding is used. And in addition, any agency that receives funding must provide a report to our Environmental Justice Council documenting their progress towards these environmental justice and health equity goals. In October of last year, Washington's Office of Financial Management estimated that of the total amount of CCA revenue that the legislature appropriated over the first 2 years of the program, nearly $924 million or 43% are dedicated to overburdened communities, and nearly $155 million or 7.3% are directed specifically to benefit tribes. So we launched the program about 1.5 years ago. So on January 1st of 2023, emissions started counting that day. Before we started the program, we provided trainings on how to report emissions, how to register for the program, and participate in auctions. And we also worked to develop the offset program. So far, we've issued offset credits for 3 projects, and those are all projects to destroy ozone-depleting substances. We held 4 quarterly auctions in 2023 and 1 so far in 2024. And in 2023, we also held 2 reserve auctions, which are triggered when the prices reach a certain level. And as I mentioned, we've raised almost $2 billion so far. And also we've decided to pursue linking with California and Quebec, and we passed legislation to help align our carbon market policies in the legislative session that happened earlier this year. And I'll talk more about linkage in a bit. So this shows you our auction settlement prices for the program so far. In 2023, the price of allowances increased at each auction and ultimately peaked in the 3rd auction before falling back down in the 4th auction. So it started, and this is all in US dollars, it started at $48.50 in the 1st auction, then went up to $63.03 by the 3rd auction, and then decreased a bit to $51.89 in the last auction of last year. These fluctuations were expected and ultimately in line with first-year trends in both California's cap and trade program and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, and are largely due to market uncertainty that comes with starting up a new program like this. In the 1st auction of this year, the settlement price was $25.76. And though the settlement price decreased significantly since the December auction, the demand for allowances remained strong and all allowances were sold at that auction. And in any market, prices respond to uncertainty. And so it's possible that the increased uncertainty due to the current political climate in Washington played a role in that, that 1st auction of this year. We would like to see more consistent pricing in our program, and that's one of the reasons why we're pursuing linkage. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has questions about the Washington Cap and Invest program and how it functions before I start talking about our linkage process and timeline.
So feel free to ask your questions in English and French. Vous êtes à l'aise à parler, à poser vos questions en français ou en anglais. Je ferai la traduction si nécessaire. Il y a des petits bulletins Q&A, questions et réponses pour les versions francophones de Zoom. Mais s'il n'y en a pas, if there's no questions, we can.
Okay.
Oh, there's one. Voila.
Okay.
Okay, this is from Luke Lendrum. Is there a significant bank of emissions allowances built up in the market?
So because our market just started, there really isn't a bank yet. So that kind of contributes to the volatility in the first year is emitters, and also a lot of the reporting is new as well. So these market participants are both like understanding, getting a better understanding of what their compliance obligations are going to be, and also they're starting from zero when the program started last year. So there is not a significant bank of allowances to date, although we have had a lot of interest from what we call general market participants, which is like financial sector participants. So they're voluntary, they don't have a compliance obligation. And so those type of participants serve a bit as a bank of allowances, in that they are holding allowances intending to sell them to the entities that have to comply with the program in the future.
Terrific. Thank you. I think that's, oh, no, there's another one. Oh, no, it's just a thank you. Okay, great.
Okay, I'll continue then. So we're now looking at linking or combining Washington's carbon market with California and Quebec. And as you likely already know, California and Quebec are already linked and have been since 2014. So the Climate Commitment Act actually directs ecology to link with other carbon markets if we determine it would be beneficial to Washington. And it also outlines some of the reasons for linking. That includes that linking would increase emissions reduction opportunities, which is expected to reduce the overall cost of compliance for businesses and consumers. We also expect that a larger carbon market would make allowance prices more stable over time. Linkage would provide consistent requirements for businesses that operate across multiple jurisdictions with cap and trade programs. And coordinating with other jurisdictions would streamline program operations and reduce program administration costs and increase market security. We're also pursuing linkage because we share a common interest in drastically reducing greenhouse gas emissions in response to the global threat to well-being and prosperity posed by climate change. And this threat really requires significant and immediate collaborative action, and linking would enhance the ability of our jurisdictions to work together to develop and implement cost-effective programs to fight climate change. So currently, Washington's Cap and Invest program operates as a separate standalone carbon market. So before each auction, Ecology decides how many allowances to add to the Washington market. Then market participants purchase the Washington allowances at the auction. And market participants can use Washington allowances to cover their emissions in Washington or trade with other businesses registered in the Washington market. But since the Washington market is separate, if a business has facilities, for example, in both Washington and Quebec, they could not use Washington allowances for compliance in Quebec, and they cannot use Quebec allowances for compliance in Washington. So in a linked market, different jurisdictions combine carbon markets to create a single market. And after linking, we would have joint allowance auctions, a common allowance price. Allowances could be used for compliance in any of the jurisdictions, and market participants could trade allowances across jurisdictions. So if Washington links with California and Quebec, then we would have, all three jurisdictions would have a joint allowance auction. Before each auction, Washington, California, and Quebec would each decide how many allowances to add to the joint auction, considering factors like their overall greenhouse gas targets and the number of allowances that would be given away for free to certain types of businesses. And then market participants from all three jurisdictions purchase allowances from that joint auction. So in a linked market, the market participants pay the same price for each allowance, and they can't tell where the allowance originated from. So once purchased, the allowances are no longer considered a Washington allowance or a California allowance or a Quebec allowance. They're all the same. In a linked market, market participants can also trade across jurisdictions because allowances can be used for compliance in all three of the jurisdictions. So in this example, if a business was operating in both Quebec and Washington, and they had some, and their Quebec facility had a bank of allowances, they could then transfer them to their Washington facility to be used for compliance in Washington. The Climate Commitment Act directs Ecology to review specific criteria to ensure linkage would benefit our state's communities, economy, and climate goals. And so we will evaluate the potential impacts of linking on communities that already have a higher exposure to environmental pollutants in Washington, California, and Quebec. We'll also look at how cap and trade programs provide benefits to those communities, as well as the potential negative impacts of linking. And we will look at whether linking could reduce the cost of compliance for businesses, which could in turn reduce price impacts on consumers. And we'll evaluate whether joining markets would impact Washington's ability to meet the greenhouse gas reduction commitments set in state law. In the beginning of last year, we started evaluating this linkage criteria and also asked for public input in Washington about whether we should pursue linking. And last fall, we issued a report with our initial evaluation and a summary of the input we received. Our analysis found that linkage would likely improve the cap and invest program's economic durability, longevity, and efficacy, because in a larger, more liquid market with a greater number of participants, allowance prices would likely be lower and change more predictably. And predictable prices can foster greater investments in decarbonization. We will continue to assess the potential impacts of linking, and we'll share a final assessment of the criteria mentioned before we make any final decision to link. And also last fall, Ecology's director decided to pursue linkage with California and Quebec. And then just a couple months ago in March, the three jurisdictions formally expressed mutual interest in forming a shared carbon market. While much of Washington's program was initially designed to align with California and Quebec, we determined that there were some changes that would be needed to the law and rules in Washington before we could actually link. In Washington, many of the aspects of our cap and invest program come directly from law. They come from the Climate Commitment Act. So earlier this year, Washington Department of Ecology put forward what's called agency request legislation, where we put forward a bill to align certain aspects of our carbon market with the California and Quebec market where there wasn't already alignment. And so some of those include the ability to align the length of our compliance periods and also certain aspects of our auction rules. And now what we're doing is we're currently in the rulemaking process to implement that bill. So to take the bill and make the changes to our regulation and also make sure that some other aspects of our regulations are aligned. So then once policy are aligned, if California and Quebec also decide they want to link, we would start discussing a linkage agreement. Before Washington can enter into any linkage agreement, we need to complete what's a new process in our state that's called an environmental justice assessment, which looks at the potential impacts on overburdened communities and sees that there are ways to try to mitigate those and ensure that those communities benefit from the action. And then we also need to get public input on the linkage agreement, so from public and tribal governments in our state. So at this stage, I cannot predict if or when we would link. It really depends on actions by California and Quebec as well. But for Washington, we expect these remaining steps to take over a year. So the earliest possible date would be late 2025 or 2026. So that's all I have for my presentation today, but I'm